The mission was supposed to be routine, but as we entered the haunted bunker, the whispers and footsteps that followed us turned it into a nightmare none of us would ever forget. During my mission in the Middle East, our platoon was assigned to investigate an abandoned bunker. Rumors of it being haunted had circulated among the locals, but we dismissed them as superstitions. Our focus was on completing the mission and ensuring the bunker was secure. As the team leader, I led our group of soldiers into the bunker. We were all seasoned professionals, but the stories had planted a seed of unease in our minds. We were prepared for anything, or so we thought. The moment we stepped into the bunker, a heavy atmosphere enveloped us. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the dim lighting cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. Every step we took echoed through the empty corridors, amplifying the sense of isolation. We moved cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls were scarred by past explosions, and we found remnants of old equipment scattered around. The bunker seemed abandoned, yet it felt like we were being watched. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our own movements. As we advanced deeper into the bunker, the unease grew stronger. The air felt colder, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled over us. It was as if the bunker itself was alive, feeding off our fear and uncertainty. We continued to explore, finding more signs of past battles, bullet holes, shattered equipment, and walls stained with dark, dried blood. Each discovery added to the growing tension. It was clear that this place had seen horrors we could only imagine. Then we began to hear it. Faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, we thought it was the wind or our minds playing tricks on us, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. They sounded like voices, murmuring in a language none of us understood. Our nerves were already frayed when we heard the footsteps. They were soft but unmistakable, echoing through the corridors. We counted heads, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Yet the footsteps persisted. It was as if we were not alone, as if something unseen was following us. In a moment of carelessness, one of our men, Private Jenkins, got separated from the group. Panic set in as we called out for him, our voices echoing through the empty halls. We followed the sound of his terrified screams, our flashlights casting frantic beams of light as we searched for him. His screams were desperate, filled with a fear that sent chills down our spines. The whispers and footsteps grew louder, more insistent, as if they were closing in on him. We moved faster, the sense of urgency driving us forward. When we finally found Jenkins, he was huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He was muttering incoherently about shadowy figures that had chased him, figures that disappeared whenever he turned to face them. His fear was palpable, and it infected the rest of us. We pulled Jenkins to his feet and made our way towards the exit, but the whispers and footsteps followed us. They were louder now, almost deafening, as if the unseen entities were right behind us. The air grew colder, and an oppressive sense of dread settled over us. Jenkins' mutterings about the shadowy figures didn't stop. He described them as dark shapes that flitted just out of sight, always watching, always following. We moved as quickly as we could, our nerves frayed and our hearts pounding. As we neared the exit, the whispers turned into hisses, angry and malevolent. The footsteps were right on our heels, and we could feel the presence of something dark and sinister. We didn't stop until we burst out into the daylight, the oppressive atmosphere of the bunker finally lifting. We regrouped outside the bunker, shaken and breathless. The experience had left us all deeply unsettled. Jenkins was still in a state of shock, his eyes darting around, as if expecting the shadowy figures to appear at any moment. We reported the incident to our superiors, but there was little they could do. The bunker remained abandoned, a place of darkness and fear. None of us were eager to return. The whispers and footsteps continued to haunt our dreams, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced. Even now, years later, the memory of that night in the haunted bunker remains vivid. The sense of dread, the feeling of being watched, and the terror in Jenkins' eyes are images that will never fade. The haunted bunker became a symbol of the unknown and the unseen horrors that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Feeling scared yet? Hold on tight. The next horror awaits. Hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Our mission was to find missing soldiers, but as spectral forms reenacted past battles and invisible forces attacked us in the haunted forest, we realized we were confronting horrors beyond our understanding. On a mission in Eastern Europe, our platoon was sent to a dense forest known for being a site of mysterious disappearances during World War II. The rumors surrounding the forest were unsettling, but we were soldiers with a job to do. We were tasked with finding a group of soldiers who had lost contact with the base. As the team leader, I led our platoon into the forest. We were determined to find our comrades and bring them back safely. Little did we know, the forest harbored secrets that would test our courage and sanity. The moment we stepped into the forest, an oppressive atmosphere enveloped us. The tall trees loomed overhead, their dense canopy blocking out most of the sunlight, casting the forest floor in an eerie twilight. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird calls. We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The path was narrow and winding, forcing us to stay in a single file. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, adding to the sense of foreboding. Despite the eerie surroundings, we pressed on, driven by the need to find our missing comrades. The tracks we were following seemed fresh, giving us hope that we were on the right path. But as the hours passed, the forest's oppressive atmosphere began to wear on us, heightening our anxiety. Every now and then, we would hear a faint noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but could never pinpoint its source. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching our every move. The further we ventured, the more the sense of unease grew, gnawing at our nerves. After hours of searching, we found tracks leading to an old battlefield. The sight that greeted us was horrifying. Remains of uniforms and equipment were scattered around, but there was no sign of the missing soldiers. The battlefield was a grim reminder of the past, with rusted weapons and craters marking the ground. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over us. We spread out, searching for any clues that might lead us to our comrades. The eerie silence was broken only by the crunch of our boots on the dry leaves and the occasional murmur of our voices. As we combed through the remnants of the battlefield, the sense of being watched grew stronger, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then, we began hearing voices. They were faint at first, barely audible, but gradually grew louder. The voices spoke in unknown languages, and their tone was urgent, almost frantic. We stopped in our tracks, straining to listen, trying to make sense of the disembodied sounds. The fear in the air was palpable, and I could see it mirrored in the eyes of my men. Suddenly, the voices were joined by screams, agonized, desperate screams that seemed to come from all directions. We spun around, trying to locate their source, but the forest remained still and silent. It was as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets of the past, secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. As we stood there, paralyzed by fear, spectral forms began to appear among the trees. They were faint, ghostly figures that seemed to be reenacting scenes from the past. Soldiers in tattered uniforms moved silently through the forest, their expressions blank and hollow. The sight sent chills down our spines, and we could hardly believe our eyes. We watched in horror as the spectral soldiers engaged in battle, their movements fluid and eerie. They fought with an intensity that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the air, yet there was no physical evidence of the battle. It was like watching a scene from a nightmare, unfolding right before our eyes. In a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, I called out to the figures, hoping for some kind of response. But they continued their ghostly reenactment, oblivious to our presence. My men and I exchanged worried glances, the fear and confusion growing stronger with each passing moment. Then, the spectral forms began to turn their attention towards us, their hollow eyes fixed on us, and a sense of malevolence filled the air. We tried to retreat, but it was as if the forest itself was conspiring to trap us. The spectral soldiers advanced, their movements growing more aggressive and hostile. The realization that we were dealing with something supernatural and beyond our control hit us like a punch to the gut. We were no longer just searching for missing soldiers. We were fighting for our own survival against forces we couldn't understand or combat. Panic set in as we realized we were being attacked by invisible forces. We felt pushes, strikes, and tugs, but could see no one around us. It was as if the spirits of the forest were lashing out, determined to drive us away. The fear and confusion were overwhelming, and we struggled to maintain our composure. We fired our weapons into the empty air, hoping to hit something, anything, that might be attacking us. But our bullets found no targets, and the invisible forces continued their assault. The sense of helplessness was crushing, and we could do nothing but endure the onslaught. The chaos was disorienting. My men shouted and cursed, trying to fend off the unseen assailants. I could feel the blows landing on my body, the pain sharp and real. The forest echoed with our cries, and the spectral forms watched with cold indifference, their ghostly eyes reflecting our terror. In the midst of the chaos, I realized that staying any longer would only lead to our demise. I shouted for my men to fall back, to retreat and regroup. We stumbled through the forest, the invisible forces still nipping at our heels. Every step was a struggle, every breath a battle against the fear that threatened to consume us. As we neared the edge of the forest, the attacks began to lessen. The whispers and screams faded, and the spectral forms grew fainter. It was as if the forest was releasing its grip on us, allowing us to escape its malevolent hold. We didn't stop running until we were far from the trees, the oppressive atmosphere finally lifting. We regrouped outside the forest, breathless and shaken. The experience had left us all deeply unsettled. We had entered the forest with a mission, but left with more questions than answers. The mystery of the disappearances remained unsolved, and the forest's sinister secret continued to haunt us. We reported the incident to our superiors, but there was little they could do. The forest remained a place of darkness and fear, a place where the past refused to stay buried. None of us were eager to return, and the thought of our missing comrades weighed heavily on our minds. The encounter left a lasting impact on us. The spectral forms, the voices, and the invisible attacks were seared into our memories. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see the ghostly soldiers and hear the desperate screams. The forest had taken something from us, our sense of safety, our confidence, and replaced it with a deep, lingering dread. Even now, years later, the memory of that mission remains vivid. The fear and uncertainty of that night are never far from my thoughts. The forest, with its dark history and unseen horrors, stands as a reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. It is a place where the past and present collide, and where the living and the dead are forever entwined. Don't go anywhere. The nightmare continues with our next story. Make sure to subscribe and comment on your favorite part so far. We thought we were guarding a field hospital, but as the dead patient began to speak and ghostly figures filled the room, we realized we were confronting the cursed spirits of the past, trapped in an ancient temple of horrors. During an operation in Southeast Asia, my platoon was assigned to protect a field hospital set up in an old abandoned temple. The temple was an imposing structure, its stone walls covered in moss and vines, giving it an eerie, forgotten look. From the moment we arrived, an unsettling feeling hung in the air, as if the place itself was alive and aware of our presence. Our mission was clear: ensure the safety of the medical staff and patients. As the team leader, I took my responsibility seriously, but I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that grew stronger with each passing day. The patients, too, seemed affected by the temple's atmosphere, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and unease. Almost immediately, patients began to complain of visions of shadowy figures lurking at the edges of their vision. They spoke of dark shapes moving through the corridors at night, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Some even claimed to feel cold hands brushing against them as they tried to sleep. The strange noises only added to the tension. At night, we could hear soft murmurs, distant screams, and the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. It was as if the temple was alive with the ghosts of the past, their restless spirits unable to find peace. Each night, the noises grew louder, more insistent, fraying our nerves. Despite our best efforts to maintain order and calm, the unease was palpable. The patients' fear was contagious, spreading among the staff and soldiers alike. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every noise a warning. We were on edge, waiting for something to happen, even though we didn't know what that something might be. One evening, as we gathered around a small fire for warmth, the chief doctor approached us with a grim expression. He shared a chilling revelation. During the previous war, the temple had been used as a site for mass executions. Hundreds of prisoners had been brought here. Their lives ended in brutal, merciless fashion. The doctor's words sent a chill through us. The temple's dark history explained the oppressive atmosphere, the sense of dread that clung to every corner. The spirits of those who had died here seemed to linger, their anger and pain permeating the very walls. We realized we were not just dealing with a haunted building, but with the restless souls of those who had suffered unimaginable horrors. This knowledge only increased our unease. The temple, once a place of worship and sanctuary, had become a monument to death and suffering. The very air seemed heavy with the weight of the past, and we couldn't escape the feeling that we were intruders in a place where we didn't belong. One night, as we stood guard, we noticed a faint light coming from one of the temple rooms. It was an unusual sight, given that the lights were usually kept dim to conserve energy. Curiosity and a sense of duty compelled us to investigate. We moved cautiously through the dark corridors, our flashlights casting long shadows on the ancient walls. When we reached the room, we were met with a sight that froze us in our tracks. A patient who had died earlier that day was sitting up on his cot, his eyes wide with terror. He was bathed in a soft, unnatural light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. His mouth moved, but the words that came out were in an ancient, guttural language none of us could understand. As he spoke, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the lights flickered. Suddenly, translucent figures began to appear around the room, their forms shimmering and ethereal. They repeated the patient's words in a haunting chorus, their voices filled with anguish and despair. It was as if the walls of the temple had come alive with the memories of the dead. The dead patient's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He continued to speak in the ancient language, his voice growing louder and more insistent. The translucent figures moved closer, their expressions twisted with pain and anger. The air was thick with their presence, and I could feel their cold breath on my skin. Panic set in as the room filled with the sounds of torture and death. The walls seemed to close in on us, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. We could hear the screams of the dying, the clashing of weapons, and the cries for mercy that had gone unanswered. It was as if we had been transported back in time, witnessing the horrors that had taken place within these walls. The terror was overwhelming. We had faced many dangers in our line of work, but nothing had prepared us for this. The spirits of the dead were all around us, their presence suffocating. We could feel their pain, their anger, their desperation. It was a nightmare come to life, and we were trapped in the middle of it. In a desperate bid for survival, we ran out of the room, our footsteps echoing through the temple. But the horrors followed us. The screams and visions seemed to cling to us, their cries filling the air even as we fled. We burst out of the temple into the cool night air. our hearts pounding and our minds reeling from the experience. The next morning, the decision was made to evacuate the hospital. The site was marked as off-limits, and no one dared to enter the temple again. The spirits of the dead had claimed it as their own, and we knew better than to disturb them. The temple stood as a grim reminder of the past, its dark history forever etched into its walls. The nightmares of that night still haunt me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the dead patient's wide eyes, hear the ancient language, and feel the presence of the spectral figures. The horrors of that night are a part of me now, a constant reminder of the darkness that can linger in places touched by unimaginable suffering. The cursed field hospital had left its mark on all of us. We had faced the unknown, and it had shown us the depths of its horror. The temple remained a place of darkness and fear, its secrets buried deep within its ancient walls. And for those of us who were there, the memory of that night will never fade, a haunting reminder of the unseen forces that can dwell in the shadows.